Good morning everyone, it's Doug Jackson from DougsWordClock.com here. Today I'm going to show you how to add the additional components into a DeskClock controller board. Here is the DeskClock board. It's a small double-sided board. We supply it to you with all of the surface mount components pre-installed. If you look at the spacing on the fine pitch microprocessor, there's no way on God's green earth I would expect someone to use a hand soldering iron to solder those. So we'll use our solder oven. In fact, let's just show you the solder oven now. Here's our solder oven here. It's essentially a glorified toaster oven. It has particular reflow profiles, and it does a really good job of reflowing the boards for us. So we will do that for you. So just put the camera back where it's supposed to be. There we go. So we'll take our controller card and we'll turn it into a finished controller. Now, what's not finished about it, you may ask? Well, actually, it's not terribly far from being finished. There are some components that don't behave too nicely in the reflow oven. The first is the tiny little piezo speaker. If we try and reflow that, it's likely to simply melt. There's the power socket. Again, if we were to reflow that, it would be damaged. There are the time setting push buttons. Again, lots of plastic. If we were to reflow those, it would end badly. And finally, our tiny little clock crystal. Let's see if we can focus on that. There we go. And that's just tiny, so we'll install that ourselves. So we start our job by getting our controller card and mounting the piezo buzzer. So the piezo buzzer gets mounted in this hole here on the board that's labelled Speaker 1 Piezo. Install the buzzer, turn the board over, use our trusty soldering iron. Tools. Of course, in order to do this task we're going to need a soldering iron. We're going to need a pair of reasonable side cutters. We're going to need solder. And we're going to need a little bit of patience, but patience is easy nowadays. So we just solder in our piezo buzzer, being careful not to melt the LEDs that are surrounding it. Once we finish soldering in the piezo buzzer, we use our side cutters and we, pushing firmly on the board, cut them off so that that area is nice and flat. And that'll become clear as to why we need to do that when we're putting the controller into a frame. Essentially, the frame relies on the circuit board being flat. Now the next part that we're going to install is our push button switches. So again, in order to install those, we just line them up on the component side, not on the front. We line them up with all the little holes, ease them in, gently pushing them down. 1, 2, 3. This is not a particularly complex task, but I felt it's probably good for people who are making the kit to spend a little bit of time doing a little bit of soldering. So again, in we get with the soldering iron. We make sure the soldering iron is on one side of the pin, the solder's on the other side of the pin, and we gently heat the joint and solder it in. Easy peasy. Now here we're very close to one of the light emitting diodes, so we work very, very gently, and we just make sure that our soldering iron doesn't touch the LED. If it does touch the LED, it's probably not terribly serious, because you'll simply deform the case, but you don't want to touch the LED anyway. You want the board to end up looking as beautiful as you possibly can. So there we go, we're now soldered. double check that the three components are nice and flat against the board, which they are, and then again placing the board on a work surface, using gentle downwards pressure to make sure that we're flat. Cut these connections off, 2, 3, as flat against the board as you can. I mean, a spacing of, you know, 1/10 of a millimetre, 1/4 of a millimetre is not going to be particularly serious, but you do want it nice and flat. There you go. That's the components on the top side of the board. Verify the buttons. Click. Beautiful. The next component that we're going to install is the crystal. My big clumsy fingers have trouble picking up tiny parts. It's extremely funny, so I use tweezers. So to prepare the crystal for installation, we gently bend the leads down and bend the leads out. Go to the top of the board. Now you see these pads here that are labelled X2. That's where our crystal goes. So the process is, try and get centered with the camera, gentle touch in the existing blob of solder, gentle touch into the existing blob of solder. That's pretty good, but we might just add just a little bit of fresh solder to each of the joints. Firstly, this component's essentially soldered in place now, but we just do just a little touch of fresh solder. Let it harden or cool. Little touch of fresh solder, let it cool. That's it, that component's thoroughly in place. The last component that we need to install is the power socket. Now when we're installing the power socket, it's very important not to install it on the front of the board. Can you imagine what that would do? That would be bad. We install the power socket on the back of the board, so it goes in that side. Gently slide it into the 3 holes. You'll find it's a firm fit. Next thing, we slide it down until there's a couple of millimetres gap. Now if we look down here, you'll notice that there's a gap of probably 2 or so millimetres. The other thing to do is to make sure that the component is at 90 degrees to the board, so it's just nice and straight. Get it roughly in place. Gently solder one pin. In this case I solder the middle pin. Now this will require a decent amount of solder in there. Only one pin. Then double check that our alignment is good. So we're lined up that way and we're lined up that way. Double check that the gap in this void is also clear, and we go into this point here and we solder in there. 1, 2, a little bit more soldering, and then we'll be completely finished, and then we can hit stop. So 1 more there. Okay, last thing to do is using the side cutters again and gently get in and cut those leads nice and flat with the board. There we go. That's the steps required to put the few components you need onto a DeskClock controller card. Hope that was useful for you. Take care.